They say you can learn everything about a person by watching how they react in a crisis, but I've learned that's not true. You learn everything about the world. And sometimes, what you see in that moment will make you question whether decency is as rare as everyone fears. If you believe that people who stand up against cruelty should be heard, then you'll want to stick around for this story. Like and subscribe so you don't miss how it unfolds. Because what happened to Clara Bennett that night was more than an accident. It was a choice, and the consequences were seismic. It started with rain, thick, cold sheets of it turning the streetlights into hazy, trembling orbs. The air was heavy enough to taste, smelling faintly of oil and wet asphalt. Clara's breath came in shallow bursts, her left hand pressed hard against the curve of her belly, the other gripping the polished metal of the ER's automatic doorframe. She was 35 weeks along, swollen ankles, a constant ache in her lower back, and a sharp, twisting pain that had begun an hour earlier while she'd been alone in her apartment, sipping ginger tea to calm nausea. The cramp had tightened like a fist inside her, then another, and another, until she could barely stand. Her obstetrician had warned her that with her condition, a placental complication, every minute in labor counted. The ER was a sterile aquarium of cold white light, the smell of antiseptic searing the back of her throat. The triage nurse didn't look up right away, just kept typing something into a computer with the patience of someone rearranging emails. Name? The nurse asked without inflection, as if Clara were ordering takeout, not fighting panic with every breath. Clara gave it, voice cracking, and slid the folded letter from her OB across the desk. It's high risk. She said I should be admitted immediately if. The nurse's eyes flicked over the paper, then back to the screen. You'll have to wait. We're short-staffed tonight. A man in the corner was moaning into a bloodied towel wrapped around his hand. A teenage boy sat against the wall with his head in his hands, flanked by two friends who smelled like beer. Clara blinked hard, trying to focus. I don't think I can, she gasped mid-sentence as another contraction curled her forward, knees buckling. The nurse's chair squeaked as she turned, glancing over her shoulder toward a passing doctor. She's not crowning, the nurse said, like it was a verdict. The doctor didn't even stop walking. Clara's phone was in her hand before she knew she'd grabbed it. Her thumb hovered over Adrian's name. Adrian Hale, the man who'd been her anchor since the moment they'd met. She hadn't wanted to bother him. He was somewhere over the Atlantic, flying back from a meeting in Zurich, probably asleep. She almost put the phone away. But then she caught her reflection in the glass of the admissions booth. Pale, rain-damp hair clinging to her temples, eyes wide and glassy with fear, and pressed call. He answered on the second ring. Clara. His voice was groggy but instantly alert. I'm at the ER, she whispered, trying not to cry. They won't see me. Another contraction ripped through her, leaving her clutching the wall for balance. Which hospital? His tones sharpened, losing every trace of sleep. She told him, and there was the brief rustle of movement on his end, the muffled sound of someone speaking in the background. Then his voice came back, low and steady. Stay where you are. I'm coming. You're in Europe, she reminded him, half delirious with pain. There was the faintest smile in his reply, even through the steel. Not for long. She slid down the wall, curling into herself on the hard vinyl chair the nurse had waved her toward, the fluorescent lights buzzing faintly above her. Around her, the ER's chaos swelled and receded. Orderlies wheeling a gurney passed at a near run, someone shouting for more saline, the faint hiss of an oxygen tank. Time stretched. Each minute was its own small war. The nurse never looked her way again. When the rain against the glass doors turned to the rhythmic thump of heavy footsteps, Clara didn't register it at first. But then the air in the room shifted, like the moment before a thunderclap. The automatic doors parted, and a tall figure in a tailored charcoal suit stepped inside, rain sliding from the shoulders of his coat. Adrian. Not just a man who'd caught a red-eye halfway across the world. He looked like someone who'd brought the storm with him. The triage nurse's posture straightened unconsciously as his gaze swept the room, landing on Clara. In 3 long strides, he was at her side, his coat brushing her knee as he crouched to her level. His hand was warm against her face, his other settling protectively over her belly. What did they do? His voice was quiet, but it carried. She shook her head, too close to breaking to answer. He looked up at the nurse. Why is she sitting here? She just arrived. The nurse stammered, eyes darting to the security camera above the desk. "No," Adrian said, standing to his full height. "She called me 40 minutes ago." The doctor from earlier reappeared, summoned by the nurse's hissed explanation, but Adrian stepped toward him, closing the gap until their shoulders were almost touching. "You've got 5 minutes to get the head of obstetrics in this room," he said, each word clipped with precision. "Or you won't be in this building tomorrow morning." The doctor started to protest. Hospital protocol, staffing issues, but Adrian's phone was already at his ear. "Put me through to the board chair," he said to whoever answered. Now, the sound of his voice, measured, ice-edged, cut through the ER chatter, drawing glances from patients and staff alike. Even the security guard near the vending machines seemed rooted in place, watching. Clara wanted to speak, to calm him, but part of her couldn't move, transfixed by the way the atmosphere had shifted. In less than 3 minutes, the hospital director was standing in the ER, summoned from some after-hours meeting. Adrian's arm stayed around Clara's shoulders as he spoke to the director in low tones that carried just enough for the words gross negligence and public liability to float through the air. The nurse who'd ignored Clara was gone, banished to somewhere beyond the swinging double doors. A new team swept in, efficient and wordless, lifting Clara onto a gurney, checking vitals, hooking up monitors. As the wheels began to roll her toward the private maternity wing, Clara caught a final glimpse of Adrian standing in the ER's center, speaking into his phone again, his voice flat. "Suspend the entire shift." Effective immediately. And in that moment, through the pain, through the dizzying relief, she realized that whatever storm had carried him here was only just beginning. They'd wheeled Clara away from the echoing chaos of the ER and into a hallway so hushed it felt like a different building entirely. The antiseptic sting in the air gave way to something faintly floral, a scent that clung to the private maternity wing like a carefully chosen perfume meant to soothe. I followed, not in body, but in the thread of her memory she later unraveled for me. Watching Adrian's shadow stretch long against the polished tile as he paced just behind the gurney. His hand never left her shoulder, the pressure both grounding and possessive, as if daring the walls themselves to question his right to be there. The new team moved with choreographed precision, one nurse adjusting Clara's oxygen, another checking the fetal heart rate, a third scanning her wristband to enter data into a rolling workstation. They didn't speak to her much, but their focus was absolute, a sharp contrast to the indifferent shrug she'd met at Triage. She noticed, even through the pain, that none of these people had been in the ER moments ago. Adrian hadn't just called for backup. He'd replaced the entire deck mid-voyage. When they reached her room, the lighting was dimmed to a soft amber glow. The bed wasn't the typical rigid hospital cot, but an adjustable, cushioned expanse with crisp white linens. A tray of warm blankets sat folded neatly at the foot, and the beeping machines were tucked discreetly to the side, their cords hidden in a way that made the room feel less like a ward and more like a private suite. It was not the place you arrived at by waiting your turn. It was the place you were taken when someone with power had decided you mattered. Adrian stood at the window while the staff settled her in, his phone pressed to his ear again. She couldn't hear every word, but fragments floated to her. Written statement, media blackout, non-disclosure agreement. His reflection in the glass was a dark silhouette framed by the city's sodium glow, his jaw tight, his free hand clenched loosely at his side. Whoever was on the other end of the call was silent for long stretches, punctuated only by his clipped responses. When he hung up, he came to her bedside, his gaze scanning her face as though cataloging every detail for later recall. "The head of the board will be here within the hour," he said, his voice a low murmur. "They'll want to apologize in person." Clara swallowed. "Adrian, you didn't have to." "Yes," he cut in, not sharply but with the kind of certainty that brooked no argument. "I did. What happened out there was unacceptable." The nurse closest to them glanced up briefly, then looked away, as if she'd already learned not to insert herself into the space between them. Clara shifted under the blanket, a twinge of unease threading through the relief. She had always known Adrian's world was one of decisive gestures and immediate results, but seeing it applied here, seeing a hospital turn on its axis because he demanded it, made her feel like she was balancing on the edge of something vast. As the monitoring continued, Adrian moved to a small side table and poured himself a glass of water from a crystal carafe that hadn't been there moments ago. "You'll stay here tonight," he said over his shoulder. "I've already had your things brought in. And don't worry about the lease on your apartment. We'll discuss that later." The casual way he dismantled her independence should have bothered her, but the truth was, the thought of returning to that empty apartment alone was unbearable. Still, she hesitated. "You talk like this is permanent." Adrian set the glass down, his gaze locking on hers. "It is." The word hung between them, heavy with meanings neither of them unpacked. And then, almost as if he sensed her need to breathe in the midst of his resolve, he shifted his tone. "You're safe now, Clara. That's all you need to think about tonight." Safe. It was a word she hadn't trusted in years, and yet in that room, with the distant hum of machines and the echo of the storm still dripping from his coat, she almost believed it. Almost. Because somewhere, in the quiet between contractions, a small voice whispered the question she wouldn't yet let herself say aloud. What happens when the man who can clear a hospital in minutes turns all that power towards something you don't want? And that was the moment. Though she wouldn't admit it until much later, that safety began to feel a lot like captivity dressed in silk sheets. By morning, the rain had thinned to a mist, and the hospital wing smelled faintly of brewed coffee and damp wool from coats left to dry. Clara sat propped against the pillows, her hands folded over her belly, watching Adrian speak with the hospital board chair in the hallway beyond her door. Their voices were low, but the body language was clear. Adrian wasn't negotiating. He was dictating terms. The chair nodded at intervals, signing a document before slipping away. He came back in without ceremony, setting the signed papers on her side table. "The staff responsible won't work in patient care again," he said simply, as if striking entire careers from the map was just housekeeping. Clara managed a quiet, "Thank you," though gratitude wasn't the only thing in her voice. There was awe, yes, but also a tremor, because it was dawning on her that Adrian's rescue hadn't been a single act. It was a pattern. When he saw injustice, he didn't just correct it. He erased it, replaced it, rewrote it until the world bent to his will. That night, after she was discharged into the polished interior of his car, the city lights smeared gold against the wet windows, she caught his reflection in the glass. The same man who had crossed an ocean in hours, cleared an ER in minutes, and made an institution bow before breakfast. Her protector, her fiancé. She laced her fingers with his, the gesture tender but tight enough that he glanced down at her, as if sensing she was holding more than just his hand. Because she was holding a question she couldn't yet ask. When the storm comes again, will it still be for me? Or because of me? And outside, the mist thickened, the street lamps vanishing into its silver hush.